Without it, no village could survive. Did you know that the main enemy of medieval man was not an armed invader, but the silent and invisible cold? The icy wind penetrated through cracks, froze the water in buckets inside the house, and turned any mistake in preparing for winter into a fatal sentence.
These people did not have central heating, modern insulation, or electric heaters, but they managed to survive in conditions that seem impossible today.
The secret lies not in the thickness of the walls or the amount of firewood, but in a unique engineering solution that turned the house into a living organism. Watch the video to the end to find out how smoke and heat management made it possible to preserve life where, it would seem, only death reigned. What if I told you that clean air in the house was considered an unaffordable luxury and a sure path to death? In winter, a medieval house turned into a complex thermodynamic machine where every element worked to retain precious heat. The central element of the system was the hearth, but not the kind we are used to seeing in beautiful movies with fireplaces. The fire burned directly on the earthen floor or on a small platform in the center of the only living room. The smoke from this fire did not go up the chimney because chimneys simply did not exist in the architecture of that time. The smoke rose and accumulated under the ceiling, forming a dense and thick layer hanging over the heads of the inhabitants. This layer of smoke acted as an ideal insulator, creating an air cushion that prevented heat from escaping through the roof. People lived in the lower layer of air, where there was less smoke, but the temperature remained acceptable for living without outer clothing.
And the smoke nearly choked.
The height of the ceilings and the shape of the roof were calculated precisely to divide the space into a living area and a smoke area. This was a brilliant use of the laws of physics, which modern man would not have thought of immediately. The walls inside such a house quickly became covered with a layer of shiny black soot, which also played a role in heat exchange. The black color of the surfaces better absorbed infrared radiation from the fire, heating up and giving heat back to the room. Soot acted as a natural antiseptic, impregnating the wood and protecting it from rotting in high humidity conditions. This black, smoke-filled space created a special microclimate that was completely hostile to the outside cold. The smoke preserved not only the wood, but also the food hanging from the ceiling, providing supplies for the long winter. The absence of a chimney meant that not a single calorie of heat escaped into the sky, as is the case with modern fireplaces. All the heat generated by burning wood remained inside the room, circulating and warming every corner. The stones of the hearth accumulated energy during the day and slowly released it at night when the fire died down to smoldering coals. It was a system with an incredibly high efficiency ratio, unattainable for many later designs. The inhabitants of such houses literally lived inside a furnace that operated in slow combustion mode. People's eyes were constantly watering, and their clothes and skin were saturated with a pungent smell of smoke that was impossible to wash off. However, this discomfort was a small price to pay for the opportunity to wake up in the morning alive and healthy. Ventilation was provided through small sash windows or through cracks in the roof, strictly controlling the release of excess smoke. Controlling this airflow required skill and a keen understanding of the weather conditions outside. Too strong a draft could cool the house in a matter of minutes, negating all efforts to heat it. During the most severe frosts, they tried not to open the front door at all, so as not to disturb the fragile temperature balance. Life came to a standstill, concentrating around the only source of light and heat in the center of the room. Every trip outside was a special operation requiring preparation and maximum speed of action. The body heat of the inhabitants themselves also contributed to heating the cramped space, adding degrees to the overall temperature. It was collective survival where each person served as a living heater for the others.
Interestingly, this type of izba construction, called a kurna, existed in many regions until the 20th century.
This proves the exceptional effectiveness of black heating in harsh winters and fuel shortages. Engineers of the past did not know the formulas of thermodynamics, but they had a keen sense of the nature of heat and air movement. They turned a lack of technology into an advantage by creating a closed-loop system. Without this smokescreen, it would have been physically impossible to survive in a wooden building at -30 degrees. It would be very interesting to hear your opinion on such extreme methods of living. Could you survive even one day in a house where the ceiling is made of thick smoke in order to keep warm? Write about it in the comments. Want to know the secret that allowed people to obtain fuel for centuries without destroying the forest around their village? Wood was the only available source of energy, and a huge amount was needed to keep the fire burning throughout the long winter. If the peasants had simply cut down trees in the forest, a lifeless desert would have formed around the settlement within 10 years.
Transporting firewood over long distances without machinery was an impossible task in deep snow.
Therefore, medieval inhabitants developed a unique forestry system that worked like a perpetual motion machine. They did not cut down the entire tree, destroying its root system and ending its life. Instead, they used a technique in which the tree was cut at a certain height, leaving a stump or tall trunk. From the cut site, new straight and flexible shoots began to grow rapidly in the spring, reaching for the sun. After a few years, these shoots turned into perfect poles, ready to be cut for firewood or construction. The root system of the old tree continued to work, feeding the new growth with double the strength. This approach allowed wood to be harvested from the same area of forest an infinite number of times. The forest was divided into sectors, and only one specific area was cut down each year. When the cycle came to an end and the peasants returned to the first area, a new forest had already grown there. It was a system of strict planning, designed to last for decades and even centuries. No one had the right to break this cycle, as it would jeopardize the future survival of the entire community. Different types of trees were grown for different needs, each of which provided firewood with unique properties. Oak provided a hot and long-burning fire, necessary for the coldest nights of midwinter. Hazel and willow grew quickly and provided excellent material for kindling and weaving household items. Birch burned brightly and hotly, even when wet, which was a lifesaver during thaws and rains. Knowledge of the properties of wood was as important as the ability to grow bread or forge iron.
Preparing firewood was hard work that took up a significant part of the warm season.
The wood not only had to be cut down, but also dried properly so that it would give off maximum heat. Raw wood consumes the energy of the fire to evaporate moisture instead of heating the air in the house. Wood piles were stacked in a special way so that the wind could blow through them, removing excess moisture. The supply of firewood was the main wealth of the farmstead, a visible indicator of the reliability and diligence of the owner. Every twig and every splinter was valuable and was never thrown away. Fallen branches and twigs were collected in the forest and served as an additional source of fuel. This cleared the forest, preventing fires and facilitating the growth of new grass and trees. Man was not the enemy of the forest. He was its gardener, shaping the landscape to suit his needs. The forest around the village was not a wild thicket, but a well-tended park, every square meter of which had an owner. Surprisingly, many of these ancient wood gardens have survived in Europe to this day. Old trees with huge, gnarled bases are living witnesses to that era. They remember hundreds of cycles of cutting and regeneration that fed dozens of generations of people with fire. This system proves that humans are capable of living in harmony with resources when their lives depend on it. The effectiveness of this method was such that villages remained in the same place for centuries. But even a mountain of the best dry firewood would be useless without a reliable heat storage facility. In the next chapter, you will learn what kind of mud and sticks were used to build walls capable of retaining this heat.
What I am about to show you contradicts all modern building standards, but it works perfectly.
We are used to thinking that a reliable wall must be made of stone, brick, or thick logs. However, for most medieval inhabitants, these materials were too expensive or labor-intensive to work with. Their houses were built from what was literally under their feet, turning into a surprisingly warm composite. We are talking about a technology that combined the flexibility of wood and the thermal insulation of clay. The base of the wall was a frame of wooden stakes, between which flexible branches of hazel or willow were woven. This weaving resembled a huge basket, forming the skeleton of the future house. By itself, such a wickerwork could not protect from the wind. It was only reinforcement. The main secret lay in the mixture that was spread thickly on both sides of the weave. The whole family prepared this mixture, kneading it with their feet in large pits right in the yard. The main ingredients of the mixture were clay, earth, water, and chopped straw or hay. The clay provided strength and bound all the components into a single monolithic mass after drying. The straw acted as a reinforcing fiber, preventing the clay from cracking when the temperature changed. But there was another secret ingredient that is often forgotten in textbooks. Manure from herbivorous animals was generously added to the mixture, which radically changed the properties of the material. The manure made the clay mixture more plastic and easier to work with when applied to walls. After drying, it formed a microporous structure filled with air bubbles. These air chambers turned the wall into an excellent heat insulator, working on the principle of modern foam plastic. Such a wall retained heat much better than stone, which quickly froze through. In addition, this material breathed, regulating the humidity inside the room and creating a healthy microclimate. The thickness of such a wall could reach 30 centimeters or more, creating a reliable barrier against the cold. The layers were applied gradually, each given time to dry so that the wall could gain the necessary strength. The final layer was often covered with lime whitewash, which protected the clay from rain and reflected light. The white walls made the dark interior of the house a little brighter on cloudy winter days. With proper care and regular repairs, such walls could stand for centuries.
Repairing such a house was a simple and affordable task that did not require calling in specialists.
If a crack appeared in the wall, it was simply filled with a fresh batch of the same mixture. The materials were always at hand, and any member of the family could handle the task. The house was a living thing that required constant care and attention from its owners. This technology was adapted as much as possible to local conditions and available resources. Stone was used only for the foundation to raise the clay walls above the damp ground. Contact with moisture was the main threat to such a structure, capable of turning it back into a pile of mud. Wide roof overhangs protected the walls from slanting rain and snowfall. Engineering thought worked here to protect the vulnerable parts of the structure. If you think living in a house made of clay and manure is primitive, think about modern eco-houses. Today, architects are rediscovering the properties of adobe and clay walls. It turns out that our ancestors knew much more about thermal efficiency than we thought. They created ideal thermoses from the rubbish at their feet. Like this if you appreciate modern warm apartments, but admire the ingenuity of the past. Are you ready to learn the truth about why roofs in the old days were made so high and steep? The roof was the main element of the house through which most of the precious heat escaped. Tiles or slate were too cold, they cooled down quickly and did not retain heat. The ideal solution was straw or reeds, laid in thick layers in a special way. It was not just a roof, it was a real duvet for the whole house. Reeds for the roof were harvested in late autumn, when the stems became dry and strong. Bundles of reeds were laid in tight rows, starting from the bottom edge of the roof and working upwards. Each layer overlapped the previous one, creating multi-layered protection from water and wind. The thickness of such a roof could reach half a meter or even more in cold regions. Air was trapped inside this thick layer of straw, creating a powerful thermal insulation barrier. Snow falling on such a roof did not melt, but lay as a thick cap throughout the winter. This was a sure sign that the heat from the house was not escaping outside, but remained inside. The layer of snow served as additional, free insulation, a gift from nature itself. If the snow melted on the roof of the house and icicles hung down, it meant poor insulation and cold in the house. A good owner was proud of the snowdrift on his roof as a sign of the quality of his home. A steep roof slope was necessary not only for water drainage, but also for weight distribution. Wet straw and snow weighed tons, and a gentle slope could simply collapse into the house. A high ridge also created space for the smoke pocket we mentioned earlier. It was always dry and warm under the roof where the most valuable things were stored. Hay and grain were dried in this space, protected from dampness and rodents. The skill of a roofer was valued like gold and passed down from generation to generation. A properly laid thatched roof did not leak even in the heaviest downpour. Water rolled off the tips of the stalks without penetrating deep into the layer. Such a roof could last up to 50 years without major repairs, requiring only partial renewal. It was an incredibly durable and practical material for its time. However, straw roofs had one terrible enemy that all the villagers feared. Dry straw ignited from any spark, like gunpowder, threatening to destroy a house in minutes. Therefore, the condition of the chimney and open flames were monitored with maniacal thoroughness. A fire in one house could easily spread to neighboring roofs, destroying the entire settlement. But the risk of burning down was less than the guaranteed death from cold without a warm roof. Birds and small rodents like to settle in the thick straw, finding warmth and comfort there. It was necessary to fight them constantly, as they destroyed the integrity of the roof. The roof was regularly inspected, moss was cleaned out, and new bundles of straw were tucked into problem areas. It was a living part of the house that required constant care and attention. Straw was a waste product of agriculture, so the material for the roof was practically free. After threshing the grain, mountains of stalks remained, which found the perfect use. It was an example of waste-free production, where every resource was used 100%. The medieval economy did not tolerate waste. Even today, in some wealthy areas of Europe, thatched roofs are considered a sign of elite housing. They are valued for their environmental friendliness and incredible ability to maintain a microclimate. What was once a sign of poverty has become a symbol of luxury and unity with nature. But back then, it was simply a matter of survival. A warm roof provided protection from above, but the cold could also attack from below. What do you think medieval peasants had under their feet? The floor in a medieval house was perhaps the coldest and most uncomfortable part of the dwelling. Most often, it was simply packed earth, which froze in winter and drew heat from the feet. Wooden flooring was a luxury that not everyone could afford and was often found only in wealthy homes. Combating the cold coming from below was as important a task as insulating the roof. Leaving the floor bare meant condemning oneself to constant illness and the inability to keep warm. The earthen floor was carefully prepared by removing the top layer of turf and covering the area with a layer of clay. The clay was tamped down with heavy mallets until it became as hard as stone. Sometimes ox blood or ash was added to the clay for greater strength and smoothness. The result was a flat surface that could be swept and kept relatively clean. But such a surface did not protect against the cold on its own. The main insulator was a thick layer of plant material that was thrown over the ground. In summer, this could be fresh, fragrant grasses, wormwood, or meadowsweet, which repelled insects. In winter, dry straw, reeds, or marsh reeds were used, laid out in a thick carpet. This layer created an air gap between the frozen ground and people's feet. The thicker the layer of bedding, the warmer it was to walk around the house. In the dirtiest places, the straw was changed regularly, raking up the old straw and burning it or sending it to compost. In corners and under benches, the layer could lie for months, compacting and turning into something like felt. This cultural layer was a real breeding ground for life, but it served its main function. It prevented the cold of the ground from coming into direct contact with people, preserving precious warmth. Sometimes woven mats made of wicker or cattail were used, which were placed in sleeping and resting areas. The mats were more hygienic and could be shaken out and dried outside. They created an additional barrier and made the surface more even and comfortable. Weaving mats was a common activity on long winter evenings by the light of a fire. Every centimeter of insulation was a small victory in the war against the cold. The threshold of the house was made high so that cold air from the street would not spread across the floor when the door was open. Stepping over the high threshold, a person immediately entered a warmer zone. The door was often lined with felt or skins to close all the gaps around the perimeter. The low lintel forced people to bow when entering, but it kept the heat in the upper part of the room. The architecture of the entrance was thought out to the smallest detail. Sleeping places were always raised above the floor on special benches or pallets. Sleeping on the ground in winter was deadly dangerous, even with thick bedding. Warm air rose, so the higher the sleeping place, the more comfortable it was. Bunk beds were often placed directly above or next to the stove in the warmest area. The elderly and the most vulnerable members of the family slept there. The earthen floor also had one obvious advantage over a wooden floor in conditions of open fire. It was not afraid of sparks and coals flying out of the hearth and could not catch fire. You could safely do dirty work on it, chop wood, or repair tools. It was a work surface, simple and reliable in operation. The earth absorbed spilled water and food scraps, which were then swept away. Over time, the floor level in the house could rise due to the accumulation of compacted dirt and bedding debris. Archaeologists can read the history of the house like an open book from these layers. Each layer tells us what people ate, what illnesses they suffered from, and how they lived in a particular year. It is a chronicle of the struggle for comfort in harsh realities. The floor was the foundation of survival in the truest sense of the word. What if I told you that personal space in the Middle Ages was a sure way to freeze to death? Modern people are accustomed to separate rooms, spacious halls, and high ceilings. For a medieval peasant, a large house would have been a curse, impossible to heat and maintain. Their dwellings were deliberately small, cramped, and compact to minimize the volume of air. Every cubic meter of space required firewood for heating, and firewood was extremely labor-intensive. The entire life of a large family consisting of several generations took place in one room. Here they cooked, ate, slept, worked, were born, and died in front of everyone. Cramped quarters were essential for survival, as people kept each other warm with their presence. At night, everyone went to bed huddled together, huddling under shared skins and blankets. This created a single thermal core that kept them from freezing even in the bitter cold. The windows in such houses were tiny, more like loopholes than sources of light. Through a large window, heat would escape at a catastrophic rate. Instead of glass, they used ox bladders, oiled cloth, or mica, which allowed only dim light to pass through. In winter, windows were often covered with straw mats or shutters that were almost completely closed. Darkness was a lesser evil compared to the piercing cold. The space was divided using curtains made of thick fabric or animal skins. These created a semblance of privacy, but more importantly, they blocked drafts. A canopy bed in feudal castles was not just a decoration, but a room within a room for retaining heat. In peasant houses, this function was performed by a canopy over the sleeping areas. Under the canopy, the temperature could be several degrees higher than in the rest of the house. Low ceilings and doorways also served the purpose of energy conservation. People had to bend down, but at least the warm air did not accumulate somewhere high under the roof. The volume of the room was exactly what was necessary for living, without any excesses. The ergonomics of the space were dictated by harsh necessity, not design intent. Everything was subordinated to one goal: to preserve precious heat. There was little furniture in the house, as it would have cluttered the already cramped space. Everything that could be hung on the walls or stored in chests, which also served as benches, was hung or stored. The table was often collapsible or simply leaned against the wall when not in use. The space was transformed throughout the day according to the needs of the family. During the day, it was a workshop and kitchen, and at night, it was a shared bedroom. Psychologically, living in such cramped conditions was incredibly difficult by modern standards. The inability to be alone created tension and conflict within the family. But the common thread of cold and hunger brought people together, forcing them to tolerate each other's shortcomings. Surviving alone in winter was practically impossible. People needed a pack. The community and family were the only guarantee of safety. Even livestock was sometimes brought into the house during the most severe frosts, with a corner set aside for them. The breath of large animals served as a powerful additional source of heat for the room. The smell of manure and animals was an integral part of the atmosphere of a winter dwelling. It was a symbiosis of all living creatures against the deadly forces of winter. Heat was a currency that was collected bit by bit. The architecture of cramped quarters dictated its own rules of behavior and social norms. People learned to be tolerant, restrained, and attentive to those around them. Any sudden movement or loud noise could disturb others in such a closed world. It was a school of social interaction in extreme conditions. A cramped, dark, and stuffy house was the best refuge one could imagine. But even in the warmest house, a person cannot sit naked forever. Do you know what the fabric that kept you warm even when wet was made of?
We must finish the
In a world without synthetics, fleece, and membrane fabrics, the choice of clothing was a matter of life and death. Cotton in medieval Europe was a rare and expensive exotic item, and it did not keep you warm very well. Linen was affordable and widely used, but it cooled the body and was only suitable for underwear. The main salvation and basis of the winter wardrobe was wool in all its forms. Woolen fabric had unique properties that made it an ideal material for harsh climates. The main secret of wool lies in its ability to retain heat even when wet. Wool fibers have a complex structure that traps many microscopic air bubbles. This air is the insulator that prevents body heat from escaping. Even if a farmer got wet in the rain or snow, his woolen clothes continued to work. This property was critically important for people who spent a lot of time outdoors. Clothes were worn in layers, a principle that is still relevant in modern clothing. The first layer was a linen shirt, which absorbed sweat and was comfortable against the skin. Several layers of woolen clothing of varying thickness and texture were worn on top. The air between the layers of clothing provided additional insulation, acting like a thermos. The top layer was often made of felted wool, which was dense and almost impervious to wind. Felting wool was an ancient technology that allowed the creation of a non-woven material called felt. Felt was used to make hats, shoes, mittens, and thick raincoats that were impervious to snow. Valenki boots, or their equivalents, were a real salvation for feet in deep snowdrifts. Felt was rough and stiff, but it provided better protection than any woven fabric. It was real armor against the cold, available to anyone who had sheep. Sheep farming was the basis of the economy and survival for many medieval villages. Sheep provided not only meat and milk, but also precious wool, which was sheared once a year. Wool processing, spinning yarn, and weaving were the main winter activities for women. The sound of the loom was the background noise of winter evenings in every home. Every thread in clothing was created by the hands of family members with warmth in mind. Good winter clothing was incredibly valuable and was cherished like the apple of one's eye. Warm cloaks or caftans were passed down from father to son, repaired and resewn. Losing clothing in winter could be a death sentence for a person. Clothing was an indicator of status, but above all, it was a tool for survival. Even the poorest tried to have at least one set of good quality wool clothing. They also used the fur and skins of wild and domestic animals for additional warmth. Sheepskin was used for coats and vests, fox or squirrel fur for hats and collars. Fur was worn with the skin side in or out, depending on the weather and the purpose of the garment. A fur lining turned an ordinary cloak into an impenetrable barrier against the cold. But wool remained the most common and versatile material. Shoes were made to be roomy so that straw could be stuffed inside or thick socks could be worn. Tight shoes led to rapid frostbite as they disrupted blood circulation. Feet were wrapped in onuchki, long strips of fabric that kept the heat in. Leather shoes were regularly impregnated with fat to prevent them from getting wet from melting snow. Dry feet were the key to the health of the whole body. The appearance of a medieval peasant in winter resembled a shapeless lump of many layers of clothing. Aesthetics took a backseat to functionality and protection. Hoods, long sleeves, belts, all these elements served to seal and heat. People wrapped themselves in a cocoon to go out into a hostile environment. Wool was a second skin that allowed people to live where they shouldn't have. To survive in the cold, it is not enough to simply dress warmly and hide indoors. The human body itself is a furnace that generates heat by burning fuel. This fuel is food, and in winter, the need for calories increased many times over. The diet of a medieval person in winter was radically different from the summer abundance of fresh produce. It was food designed to provide energy and warmth from within, heavy and filling. The basis of the winter diet was grain crops in the form of bread, porridge, and thick soups. Grain was easily stored in barns and contained a huge amount of carbohydrates necessary for long-lasting energy. People grew rye, oats, and barley, which became the basis for every meal. Bread was often coarse and dark, but it was precisely this that gave a feeling of fullness for the whole day. Hot soup, in which a spoon could stand upright, was the main dish of the day for every peasant family. It was cooked in a huge cast-iron cauldron over an open hearth, with new ingredients constantly being added as it was eaten. This cauldron could go unwashed for weeks, becoming a source of so-called eternal soup. This method of cooking saved firewood and ensured that hot food was always available. Fats were critically important for maintaining body temperature and normal metabolism in cold weather. Lard, butter, and melted animal fat were added to all dishes where physically possible. Fatty foods took longer to digest, which meant that the body released the necessary heat for longer. Without sufficient fat, people began to feel cold even in the warmest clothes. Lean and fresh meat was reserved for major holidays, while on ordinary days people ate salted pork or dried meat. Surplus livestock was always slaughtered in late autumn so as not to waste valuable feed on extra mouths to feed in winter. This was the time for preparations, when the whole family worked to preserve meat supplies. Meat was tightly packed into barrels with salt, smoked in chimneys, or simply frozen in deep ice houses. Raw vegetables were practically unavailable, so they were only consumed in processed form. Sauerkraut, pickled apples, dried peas, and lentils were always present on the table. These products were the main sources of vitamins during the long absence of sunlight. Turnips and carrots were stored in deep cellars, covered with a thick layer of dry sand to keep them fresh. Sauerkraut was a real superfood of the Middle Ages because it retained a huge amount of vitamin C. It was sauerkraut that saved people from scurvy, exhaustion, and constant winter illnesses. Natural fermentation made vegetables more digestible and very nutritious. Without these reserves, the human body quickly succumbed to severe winter infections. Cooking required a huge amount of time and dry firewood, so hot meals were usually eaten twice a day. In the morning and evening, the whole family would gather around the common cauldron to get their rightful share of warmth. The food was extremely monotonous and simple, but no one complained about the taste as long as there was enough to eat. Hunger was the most terrible and constant fear that hung over every village throughout the winter. If the grain or vegetable supplies ran out ahead of time, a real tragedy began in the house. People had to mix tree bark or quinoa into the flour to somehow deceive their empty stomachs. Spring was the most dangerous time, when the old food was already gone and the new food had not yet grown. Therefore, thriftiness and prudence were the main qualities of a good host. Alcohol in the form of weak homemade beer or ale also played an important role in the winter diet. It was very high in calories, warming, and, most importantly, completely safe for daily consumption. In winter, water had to be melted from snow or ice, which required valuable fuel and time. Beer, on the other hand, was brewed in advance in very large quantities before the first serious frost set in. Medieval beer was very different from modern beer. It was thick, cloudy, and very nutritious. It served more as a liquid food than just an invigorating drink for relaxation. Even children drank it, as the brewing process killed all dangerous bacteria in the water. This drink helped people endure the cold and gave them extra strength to do their household chores. Fasting, which took up a significant part of the winter before Christmas and Easter, also imposed its own strict restrictions. During this time, people completely gave up meat and animal fats, switching to fish and vegetable oil. Fish was prepared in advance in dried and salted form and became the main source of protein. Such restrictions helped to better control food supplies and prevent all meat from being eaten at the beginning of winter. Paradoxically, religious precepts helped peasants conserve their most valuable meat resources. It was a kind of diet that regulated food consumption at the community level. People got used to discipline in eating, which was vital for survival in conditions of scarcity. Faith helped them find meaning in deprivation and take a more responsible approach to their pantries. The ability to distribute food wisely so that it would last until the first harvest was the highest art of every housewife. Every day she solved the most difficult task of optimization, carefully weighing the remaining grains and flour. The slightest mistake in these calculations could cost the whole family their lives during the spring famine. Food was the only fuel that people put into the furnace of their bodies. With the arrival of winter, the rhythm of life in a medieval village slowed down, almost coming to a complete halt until spring. Daylight hours became frighteningly short, and artificial lighting remained a very expensive and dim pleasure. Thin splinters and tallow candles were saved for the most extreme cases, so any active activity was kept to a minimum. People voluntarily went into a mode of strict energy conservation, much like bears in their winter dens. Peasants spent most of the day asleep or in a state of semi-sleep on their warm couches. Sleep in those days was often fragmented and very different from our modern night's rest. People went to bed very early, at sunset, slept for a few hours, and then woke up in the middle of the night. During this nighttime break, they could keep the fire going in the hearth, pray, or talk quietly. This nighttime wakefulness was a period for deep reflection and quiet conversation in complete darkness.
The harvest.
After that, people would fall back into a deep sleep until the first signs of dawn on the horizon. The body adjusted itself to natural cycles, significantly reducing physical activity and metabolic rate. Any unnecessary movement in those days meant a wasteful expenditure of precious calories and heat. Outdoor work in winter was limited to only the most essential tasks necessary to maintain the household. This included daily care of livestock, clearing snow drifts, and bringing in firewood and fresh water. Everyone tried to complete these tasks as quickly as possible so they could return to the comfort of their homes. Any heavy physical labor was deliberately postponed until spring, when it would be lighter outside. Winter was the perfect time for small household chores and high-quality repairs of all farm equipment. During this time, the men wove new baskets from vines, repaired horse tack, or carved spoons and bowls from wood. These activities did not require much movement and allowed them to stay close to a source of heat. All the men's work was focused on preparing for the upcoming fieldwork season. During this time, women endlessly spun, wove, and sewed new clothes for the whole family, taking advantage of every ray of light. Handicrafts were not entertainment or a hobby, but a harsh necessity for survival. Every thread and every scrap of fabric was invaluable for keeping children and adults warm. Working together to the accompaniment of quiet old songs or stories helped pass the endless winter evenings. Constant boredom and confined space were a serious psychological test for all family members. People stayed in one room for weeks, which required enormous patience and the ability to smooth over conflicts. Stories, legends, and fairy tales were the only entertainment available and a way to escape the harsh reality, at least for a while. The older generations passed on oral traditions to the younger ones, preserving the history of their clan and people. Social life in the village did not come to a complete standstill, but it changed its usual format significantly. Holidays such as Christmas became bright flashes of long-awaited light and joy amid the winter darkness. People visited each other, gathered to perform ancient rituals and play fun group games. This helped maintain strong ties within the community and effectively combat winter depression. Shared laughter and sincere joy warmed the human soul, just as an open fire warmed a cold body. The isolation of each individual village in winter could become complete if all the roads were completely covered with deep snow. News from the big outside world practically ceased to arrive, and the settlement began to stew in its own juice. At such moments, any traveler caught in bad weather became the most welcome guest and storyteller. The silence of the winter village was always very deceptive, because inside each house there was a quiet and persistent struggle for life. Everyone waited for the first drops of rain and the ringing of streams as a signal to return to the active world. Winter tempered the spirit and made people appreciate every moment of warmth and every piece of bread on the table. Nature slept, and people slept with her. When the sun began to warm and the snowdrifts settled, turning into streams, the most dangerous moment arrived. Food supplies were running low, firewood was running out, and the body was weakened by months of darkness and monotonous food. Spring was a time of hope, but also a time of the most severe hunger, called the hunger gap. The old grain had been eaten, and the new grain had not yet been sown. It was in March and April that mortality often peaked. Survival depended on how accurately resources had been calculated in the fall. Those who had not been able to store enough grain or firewood faced death on the very threshold of warmth. The community often came to the rescue, sharing what little they had left in order to preserve a workforce. Mutual aid was insurance that worked better than any money. The death of a neighbor weakened the entire village in the face of future work. The first greens, nettles, quinoa, sorrel, were perceived as a gift from heaven. People eagerly pounced on any edible sprouts to replenish their vitamin reserves. Opportunities arose to fish in open water and hunt birds. The diet began to slowly but surely enrich itself. It was a signal for the body to wake up from hibernation. Preparations for fieldwork began, with plows and harrows being repaired. Men went out into the fields to assess the condition of the soil and winter crops. The fate of the coming year depended on how the grain had survived the winter in the ground. Every green sprout in the field was greeted with joy and relief. The cycle of life began anew. Houses were opened wide to air out the smoke and soot that had accumulated over the winter. Old bedding was taken out and burned, and floors and walls were washed. This was a ritual cleansing of the home, driving out winter and disease. Sunlight penetrated the darkest corners, killing mold and dampness. People squinted at the bright light, having grown unaccustomed to it over the past 6 months. The cattle were led out onto the first patches of thawed ground, even though there was still almost no grass. The animals, thin and mangy after wintering, enjoyed their freedom no less than the people. The survival of the herd was a great victory for the peasant family. Now they could count on milk and offspring. Life returned to its usual routine of hard work. The winter they had endured became another notch in their memory, another trial they had passed. Stories about how harsh it had been became part of local folklore. Those who survived the winter felt like victors in a battle with death itself. This gave them confidence in their abilities and strengthened their spirit. At that moment, the genius of all those simple solutions we talked about became apparent. The smoky ceiling, clay walls, thatched roof, and cramped quarters all worked. The system withstood the test of extreme stress. The village endured in order to continue living, raising children, and preparing for the next winter. The circle was closing, but experience was accumulating. Each generation made its own small improvements to this survival strategy. This is how a sustainable culture was formed, capable of thriving in an area of risky agriculture. Spring was not just a change of season, but a celebration of life. The history of winter survival in the Middle Ages is not just a story of cold and hunger. It is a hymn to human ingenuity. A thick skin or a hot fire alone was not enough to withstand the merciless nature. The main secret was a comprehensive heat preservation system, the center of which was a black hearth and a smokescreen. This technology was born out of necessity, but perfected through centuries of trial and error. We see how every element, from the straw on the roof to the logs in the stove, was part of a single mechanism for survival. It is interesting to think about which of these ancient principles we could apply today in an era of environmental crises and the search for energy-efficient solutions. Perhaps we have something to learn from people who knew how to live in harmony with the harsh climate without destroying the planet. Suggest topics for future videos in the comments. What other forgotten technologies of the past would you like to learn about? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new dives into history that aren't written about in textbooks.
It grinds the grain much faster than by hand.
It is truly